everybody, this is Jesse from NAPCO Tech Support. And in this video tutorial, we're going to be going over migrating a system from DL Windows to MVP Access. First, I'd like to start out by pointing out that there are differences in the two platforms. Where DL Windows is a free software/programming utility, MVP is a cloud-based managed access real-time platform. For example, when a change is made in DL Windows, each lock needs to be downloaded individually. Even though we do have the wireless screen that we can set to send information to all the locks, they are still downloaded one at a time. Where in MVP, when a change is made for adding a badge, changing a schedule, for example, all the locks or net panels are downloaded at the same time in real time. Another difference is the logs for each lock with DL Windows are stored in the lock, where you have to manually retrieve them. MVP, all events are set directly to the cloud in real time. There is a setting where valid badges can be stored in the lock to upload once a day, and that's to save battery life in those units. Any network's lock or net panel can be changed over to MVP Access. One note, we'll put a pop-up here to remind everybody, if you're using net panels that are using a NDK or NPDK, the keypad reader, those will need to be changed out to prox readers. That may require additional wires. If you're going to be using prox, NPIN, and any combination, we recommend using the CIC RP640 HAB. We'll put that part number up. Any existing ALIME3 gateway can be upgraded to work with MVP. Any existing Gen 1 or Gen 2 ALIME or ALIME2 will need to be replaced with a MVP IME3 gateway that's preloaded with cloud firmware, or you could update other Gen 3 gateways. Another note is this is only for networks locks. Alarm lock T3 locks are not compatible with MVP. Okay, now we're going to be going into getting MVP set up and started. But before we continue, the steps we outline in this video are the best practices we have found in tech support helping dealers migrate DL Windows system to other access platforms. There may be differences in your facility. This also could depend on the amount of locks and personnel that need to be moved over. For example, if it was a small system with 5 or 6 locks and 20 or so people, some of the steps may not be necessary to have a successful migration, but some of these steps will definitely help if you have bigger systems. So to get started, the first thing that needs to be done is the account needs to be activated on NAPCO Comnet. And if you haven't registered on NAPCO Comnet, you will have to do so as a dealer. If you are a brand new dealer that has not used other remote service products from us, and you need to create an account, just please be advised it could take up to 24 hours for approval. In the NAPCO technical library, I'll pause it here so everybody can see the URL. We do have a Comnet activation guide that will go over activating Comnet and getting an account set up on Comnet. One thing to remember when you are registering your customer on Comnet for their account, please use their company name or name. You would not register the individual account under your dealer name. That would be the overall account on Comnet. And if you ever needed assistance activating, you could always contact the NAPCO Comnet team at 800-645-9445, Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5 p.m. Once we have an account created, you will get 2 emails. On your first activation of an MVP account, you will get a dealer credential login that will follow Comnet with a dealer account number, and your customer will get an email with their login to the MVP system. Also, another tip, when you're registering, make sure you put the customer's email on the registration for the individual account so they get the registration email with their credentials. Okay, now that we have the account created and we're logged in, the next step is going to be start pre-setting up the MVP to allow for an easier migration over that will help allow some of the existing locks to stay working until they're fully moved over to the MVP to try to allow for a seamless integration. Just want to point out before we go any further that on the dashboard we have the MVP help access. This has a ton of information in it that helps explain different areas of the system, and they can be accessed on any screen that will come up, and it will explain what's on that screen. It will filter it out. So the first thing that we need to worry about setting up are our badge formats. So in DL Windows, the badge format is set up in each individual card. In MVP Access, this is a global setting. So we would go to Administration and then Badge Formats. We do have some preloaded badge formats in there, HID 35-bit, 26-bit, 37-bit. So if you're using those cards, like a standard 26-bit, you would not need to do anything else in this screen. If you were using the alarm lock, the AL HID 36-bit, we would have to change the preloaded Continental 36-bit format to match the alarm lock one, because you cannot have two card length bits of the same in any access system. We do have the AL HID 36-bit format available. It's in the knowledge article in our customer portal that's accessed through the tech library. It explains what needs to be set in the different fields. So we would click on the Continental 36-bit, click on Edit. We're going to change the name to AL or Alarm Lock, whatever you'd like. And then we would go and change the information for the badge. Now, once we have the information in there, we're going to click Save. We'll pause this here for a quick second so you can copy it down if you need. And again, once you're done, we're going to hit Save, and that will set the badge format in the entire system. Again, this is a global setting in MVP as compared to DL Windows. Okay, our next thing we're going to want to set up are our schedules and our access groups. So going back to DL Windows, where we set each individual user to what doors they are allowed in, and possibly a group, that group might restrict their access to certain times or other special functions, of which we'll go over later. In MVP, we set up access groups, and then we say in that access groups what doors people in that access groups are allowed into, along with a time schedule that will restrict what times they are allowed access if applicable. So first we're going to want to set up our schedules. So we're going to go to Administration and then Schedule. It does come with 3 preloaded schedules in there. The 24/7, this gives access all the time, unrestricted, Monday through Friday, the weekends, and holidays if we set those up. There are a couple of weekend and weekday ones. We can modify those if we need, but we can create as many as we need. So when locks are learned into the system, they always are set to the 24/7 group. That will make a little more sense as we go on. And this is also where you could make a schedule for free access. If you ever wanted to do something high security with a card and a PIN during certain times, we could set all that up here. So to make an example schedule, we're going to click on Add. We're going to give it a name. We can call this general access for the general employees that may only have access to a facility during the normal business hours. We would click on New Block. And then to set that up, we would do Monday And then our end day would be Friday. And we could do an example from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. for employees with general access, and then we can hit save. If we wanted to go to a little more in depth, we could do another schedule for some people that may need access on the weekends. Again, we're going to type the name in, click on new block, and we could set up the same time frame for Monday through Friday. And then if they needed to have different hours on the weekends, we would do another block, and we could set something up, for example, Saturday to Saturday. From 9 a.m. to, let's say, noon. And if we needed to do something different for a Sunday, we could add that in a block, or if they were the same time both days, we could just do Saturday through Sunday. And then again, once we're ready, we can hit save. The next one I'm going to go over would be setting up a free access schedule, because this will apply later on, but since we're in schedules, we can add it here. And then we're going to do a new block, and let's say we have a front door that's going to be Monday through Friday, and it's going to have free access from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. And again, if we needed to do something different on the weekends, we would add that all into the same schedule, because we can only put one free access schedule per reader per lock. But again, as you can see, we can add many different options into one schedule. And then we would hit save. The last schedule we're going to go over would be setting something up if we were going to use holidays, because we could put holidays in that will restrict access if we put holiday dates in, which we can go over at another time. And it's also in the help menu. So if we were going to use a holiday dates, and when we make a schedule, if holiday HOL is in the schedule, that means that schedule will work on a holiday. So if you remember, on the other access groups and the free access, I took that out, so those schedules will not fire on a holiday. But let's say we needed a fourth group, which may need more access than the other ones, but maybe not as much access as the 24/7, where there may be a need for them to come in on a holiday. This would probably be, some special personnel for the facility. Again, that may not want to have 24/7 all the time access, but may need more access, and they may need to get in on a holiday at certain times. So looking at this schedule, this will give somebody access on Monday through Friday, even on the weekends during 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. If, beyond those times, they wouldn't be allowed access. And then again, on a holiday where they may need to come in for something special during a day, but we may not want to have them have access to the facility, beyond the scheduled times with the 24/7. So now that we created our schedules, we could keep adding more if we needed to. The next thing that we would want to set up would be our access groups. So that would be an access and then access groups. It comes preloaded with all door access that is going to be set to the 24/7 schedule. And we'll see later on when we go to learn in locks, all locks are learned into this access group. So any cards assigned to that access group will automatically start working. But going back to DL Windows, again, where we have individual users set to what doors, we're going to use access groups in MVP. So this is kind of going to mimic what we did setting up the schedules. Where we could set this up, and then this is where we would assign the individual locks and locks/panels once they're learned into the system. The reason we recommend presetting these up as locks are learned in, you can go back to this screen and set them up either one at a time, or if you did them a group at a time. So for right now, we're going to hit save and save this. And that's how you make an access group. And we can continue to make them for the other ones as needed. And then we'll be going back to this section later once the locks are learned into the system. So just to review this section, we went over setting up schedules and access groups in the MVP, where these are combined in this platform as compared to where they are in separate sections in DL window. And we also showed how to set up a free access schedule, which we'll explain later once we learn the locks in. Free access is equal to passage mode in DL window. Okay, in this section, we're going to be going over how to set up personnel. This is where we would actually program the individuals into the system with their card or PIN number. Along with any other pertinent information, the access groups, the ones that we created in the other section, and also a facility code if we're using facility codes. Now, if you're using PINs, we wouldn't be using a facility code, but if we had cards and wanted to use a facility code, we would set that also in the personnel. One difference between DL Windows is that in the card, we set the facility code for each individual user. This is the global setting, just like we did when we set up the badge format. This is something that you would set up in the facility code section and just put what number slot you put the facility code in. And I want to go over this first before we go over personnel, so it makes a little more sense. So facility codes will be set up in administration facility codes. We would click add. Right now, I couldn't add any because I don't have any locks or net panels learned in. But once we do, we'll set those up later in this video once we have those learned in. You can have up to 10 facility codes per system. And again, they go in a slot. So if we're using the alarm lock cards, that facility code is 19. And that would apply to every badge. We wouldn't put 19 in the badge. We would just put slot 1 that matches that facility code. And if you had other cards, maybe some 26-bit and they had a different facility code, you could put those in slot 2, 3, 4, etc. And then once all the panels are in, this is a one-shot deal. You could click apply to all panels. And then when you save it, it will save it to every lock. Can't say this now because they're not learned in, but we will get back to this section. So to set up personnel, we would go to access and then personnel. And then we click on add personnel. And then we'd have to type in information, first name, last name, the badge and or PIN number. It's not a separate section. So if someone had a badge, we would put the card code in there. If it was a PIN number, this is where we would put the PIN. Set the facility code. So if it was a card, for example, remember we put 19 in slot 1 because we'll say this is an alarm lock card. and that was put in slot 1. If it was a different one, you would just set what slot you put it in. Also, there's a 2-factor PIN. This is what would be used for high security mode, or as an MVP, we call it card and badge, that can be set up on a schedule to work during certain hours or all the time if you had a door that we always wanted to have a 2-factor. The last thing I'd also like to point out is we could set a badge for an activation date and time and an expiration. So you could give somebody a PIN or a credential ahead of time and it won't work until those certain dates. Like if you had somebody coming in to do work in the facility, you wanted to pre-give them a card, you could do that. Okay, so we have our first name, last name, we put the PIN number in or badge number, and then over in access groups, this is where we would set up one of the pre-configured access groups you already made. Now, every badge comes automatically loaded to all door access. We can change that by picking one of the access groups that we already created. You do have up to 16 access group slots per user. If you needed something special, but somebody had general access, but maybe they needed access to one special door, you could put that in a separate access group and then assign that to them for special circumstances. Or if you had a lot of doors, it was just easier to break down. We do have a few slots to help you make access groups in a bigger system. So once we have everything set up that we need, we were going to click Save, and it will load the badge into the system. This was how to create a personnel or badge or PIN in the system. If it's a smaller system you're moving over, it may just be quicker to add them in. If you had a large number of users, we do have an import badge option that you can export the CSV file from DL Windows and move it over to a new one that can be imported into MVP. We're going to go over that in the next part here, and you'll see that it's not exactly straightforward. Everything doesn't line up. There's going to be some copying and pasting that needs to be done. So that's going to be up to you and the building personnel, whoever's going to be entering the badges, on the best way to do it. In this part, we're going to be going over how to use the import export option to get the personnel from DL Windows into MVP. Now, if you're going to be doing this, please go into the dashboard, into the help file, and look at the import badges section. There's a little bit to this, and I definitely recommend reading over this section before proceeding. When we're doing this, we're going to have to do a particular layout of a .csv file to import into MVP. We do have a sample one. If you click there, that can be downloaded from our technical library. But I want to just review this. So this is going to be the layout for the MVP. And as you can see, a lot of it lines up with the personnel screen. A is going to be your facility code. So if we were using facility code, remember, we're not putting the facility code of the card in there. We're going to put what slot we put that facility code in. So if we only had one facility code, any badges that were using that, we would put 1 in there. Remember, PIN numbers, we would leave it 0. If you had a second facility code, you would put 1 in for the facility code that pertains to those cards, and 2 that were the ones that pertain to the other card. Next is going to be our badge or PIN numbers, last name, first name, the access group, what access group it's going to be in. Remember when we set up access groups? this particular system has 4 in it. You may have less, you may have more, but you're going to put in what access group: 1 for all access, 2 for general access in our case here, and then you have 3 and 4 for the extended general access that we made. If you had more than one access group, you would put whatever access group that is in there, the 1 through 16. The 2-factor PIN, if we're using card end PIN and we had 2-factor PINs for certain users, we would put them in this slot. Again, there's a lot in this section, so please read it over. This is an example of a CSV export from DL Windows, and we also have the MVP one below so you can compare. You can see we have the first name, last name. These are the pins. First name, last name, the pins. The cards are over here, but remember, those all have to be combined into the same slot on MVP, which would be B. This is one that I exported from my software, and then we'll go over a little bit on how to move some of the stuff over. This is one that I moved everything over. As you can see, I combine the pins and cards. The facility codes, these are my pins, so they're going to be 0. The last name, the first name, and what access group, these are going to be put in. Once we're satisfied, we'll save this. We're not going to go over moving everything. It's literally just copying what cells from the DL Windows one and pasting them in the proper cell in the MVP one. So once we have this all set, we would save it. And then now we're going to move over back to MVP into the personnel section under access. And then we're going to click on import badges. We choose a file. I have this saved on my desktop, so we're going to pick this one. This is a chance to fix any mistakes. So if you saw something that needed to be changed, it could be changing here. Like, for example, if we put this in the wrong access group, we wanted this to be group 2, we could just change it here. You could also add a row. If you forgot one person, we could just add them in there if needed. And we could set their access group. You could also delete a row if you needed to. If somebody was not correct and we didn't want to import them in, you could highlight that and then click on delete selected row. So once we're satisfied and we're ready to move everything in, we click on create, hit yes, and then we'll create it. And now you can see we have all the badges in there, and they were assigned to what access group number we put in, if they had a facility code, the card number or PIN, and what access group is going to be set. Okay, now that we have the file set up, also it is important to make sure that we save it as import badges template.csv. Once we're ready, we will go back to MVP in access personnel, and then click on import badges. We would pick on choose a file. I say this on my desktop, so we pick this. You can make a quick line edit here if you needed to, if you found a mistake. Like if we needed to change this to access group 2, if we made that mistake, we could. You could also add a row if you forgot, let's say, one person. We could just add that in there with the same information that we did in the spreadsheet. And you could always delete a row too if you found something that's not correct. You could just delete it and bring it in the next batch that you bring over. So once we're ready and we're good to go, that everything is set correctly, we're going to click on create and then hit yes. And badge create complete, as you can now see, all those badges or PIN numbers were moved over and set up just like the one that we created in the section. This one is a PIN number. This one is a badge because we have it set to a facility code and the actual access group that it was set to. Okay, now it's time to start moving over your gateways, expanders, and your locks. Pro tip, if you have more than one gateway, it might be best to move over each gateway and the corresponding expanders and locks one at a time in order to keep the most of the facility running as possible. Again, each project is going to be different, so that's going to be up to you and the building personnel. Any Gen 3 gateways can be updated with the cloud firmware. There is a process on the tech library on how to do that. Any older Gen 1 or Gen 2 gateways would have to be replaced with MVP gateways with preloaded firmware, or Gen 3 gateways that were updated with the cloud firmware. Before we start, we're going to go back to the help file, and then in wireless, under wireless configuration, please take some time to read over this section, because as we discussed before, this is a real-time access system, so the signal strengths are very important. As compared to DO Windows, where we used to say anything that's 30 is okay, really when we get to MVP, we wanted it to be 42. Anything between 42 and 30 is going to be considered fair, but we want everything to be in the good range, which is above 42. So now is the time, before we get too far into it, if you start discovering locks and we see that some signal strengths are low, this would be the time to maybe adjust the location of the gateway expanders or add an additional expander, or maybe even a gateway if needed for the proper coverage. Oh, we also have another thing in the help file about hardware placement tips. Again, it shows you, as we said, we want everything to at least be a 42, which is considered good. That's fully acceptable. Excellent is optimal. Fair, as we said, that could be between 32 and 42. It is usable, but you may have signal loss and possibly some performance issues. So, as we said, this is the time, if you start learning locks in and you see the signal strengths are low, anything below 32 definitely needs to be addressed. Anything between 30 and 42, we may want to consider adding another expander possibly, or again, another gateway even, just to break it up to get better signal strength. This is the pro tip again. We want to address this now before we start learning in a massive amount of locks, because if we learn locks in and the signal strengths are not good, those locks would have to be completely deleted, defaulted, relearned in, and reprogrammed if we had to add expanders or move them to another gateway. Also in this section, there are some tips about mounting the gateway and optimal expander location, and also what effects some of the building construction could have on it. Please definitely take some time to look over this section and get yourself familiar before we start adding locks in. Okay, now to add in a wireless expander, we're going to go first to Configuration COM ports. Click on Add. We're going to give it a description. You can put whatever description you want, the location of the building. Make sure we pick Alarm Lock Wireless Gateway. And this is where we would type in the MAC address of the gateway. Okay, so we have the MAC address of the gateway typed in. This is where we would set the time zone where it's located. And at this point, we would hit Save and Write Config. If you are upgrading Gen 3 gateways, please have them updated to the cloud firmware before adding them in. If they were added in before the firmware update, the firmware update may go through, but it may not look as described in the procedure. So let's click on Write and Save Config. And now we loaded that COM port and gateway into the system. It may take a few seconds for it to learn in. We would go to wireless config, and then once it learned in, the status here would say ready. Okay, now that our gateway is programmed in under configuration COM ports and synced up with the MVP server, next would be learning in expanders if you have any. Any expanders that were learned into DO windows will need to be defaulted before we learn them in. So if they have not been defaulted, you would need to go ahead and do that now before learning in the expanders. Also, if you added any expanders, make sure they're on the same group number as the gateway. If they're not, you'd have to set those now as well and then do a default on them before we learn them in. So to learn in expanders, we would click on expanders and then click on search. It discovered at least one expander on the gateway, and it's sending in the MVP firmware to that expander. Okay, so we have one expander on here that we discovered. Also, the signal strength on these are just as important as the locks. We want them to be at least a 42 or above, whether it's from the gateway to the expander, or if there's an expander after an expander, we want the signal strength of those to all at least be above 42. So if they're not, at this time, you'd want to make adjustments to get the signal strength into acceptable range. You would want to try to default any ones that weren't in range after you rearrange them, and then search them back in. So now it's time to start discovering locks. When we discover locks, they get loaded with new firmware for MVP. And this is the one time where we said before, when you make a change, everything is loaded in at one time. When we're learning in locks, they get a new firmware download, and then they get a full data download. So this is done one at a time. So we want to learn in each lock one at a time. This is a little different from DO windows, where we just discover them and assign them to the account after they're discovered. This actually takes a firmware download and a data download. So we want to do one at a time. It's actually quicker to learn in one at a time if you try to learn more than one in, because each download is done individually. The other ones will stay queued up, and then you will fail, which will result in them having to be removed, defaulted, and then rediscovered. So again, any locks that were on DO windows will need to be defaulted. Even if it's a new lock, we want to go through that default process. If you have any questions, there is in the help guide a reset procedure for locks, the different kind of locks, and the net panel. So to discover a lock, we're going to click in Discover Locks. I'm going to pick a larger amount because at NAPCO we have a lot of test units, so it's going to pick up more than just the couple that we're going to be learning into this system. So again, this is going to be up to the amount of locks, yourself and the building personnel about how we want to bring them over. We said before, if we have more than one gateway, we want to tackle each gateway at a time, and again, that leaves the current locks with the alarm lock programming in them until their default. Definitely is a good idea to do one lock at a time, or you could default, 3 or 4 to 5, get them learned in, and then move on to another batch. So we're going to click on Discover Locks, and it will search for all the locks that have been default. In this example, we will discover one and load one in, and then I'll show you the rest of the programming for that lock, for putting in some information into the reader, which we call it a locker reader, and assigning that to an access group. This would be quicker if you were only doing like 3 or 4 locks at a time. Okay, so we find one of the locks we're going to be learning into the system. Again, we want to check the signal strength. We want it to be in excellent or good range. Anything fair should work, but you may have performance issues with it. So we're going to pick just the one lock we want to discover. And this is where we can give the name for the panel, because this is actually learning as a panel in this scenario. And then there's also a reader, which we'll show you later. And then once we can put the name of it in, we hit add lock. And now it's going to find it, download the MVP firmware into it, and do a full data download. Also, any cards or pins that are assigned to the all access group will automatically be loaded into the lock, and those will start working immediately. So after it did the firmware download, and as you can see in the command status, it's doing a data download, and that just completed. So now that we discovered it in a lock, we would want to set up a couple things. You have configuration panel and locks. And there's really not much in here to set because we put the name in already. Depending on what kind of lock or the activity, the retrieval schedule for valid badges you could set to immediately, daily, or weekly, where it will send in valid badges into the system. If it's a wireless lock and it's not on a real critical door, we'd recommend daily, because that will definitely help conserve battery life for the lock. The next place we'd want to go is configuration readers. And then again, we would put the name of the reader in. In the wireless locks, it will be essentially the same as the panel. Next, we could go to door control. If we were going to use a free access schedule that we made when we were doing schedules, we could drop that down, put in a free access. If we're going to be using pins or any kind of two-factor and it's a keypad lock, we need to enable that because those pins will not work. So we would click on enable keypad. We'd want to leave this common code schedule as 24/7. This will allow the pins we program as a badge to work once it's saved. And another note, in MVP, when you enter in a pin number, unlike when it's on alarm lock, you need to hit the AL key in order for it to open the door. There's no way to disable that. If we were doing something with like two-factor authentication where we wanted a card and a pin, we could have a lock always require a card and a pin, or put it on, let's say, a weekday schedule that's only during a certain time, or maybe only on the weekends we want somebody to do a card and a pin, but that would be a schedule if you wanted to use that. In the door options, is not much to do here unless you're doing something where you want a two-person or multi-read, but just for a general lock, we're going to hit save. And the next step would be assigning this to the access groups that we create. So we go to access and then access groups. Now, as I said before, it's automatically learned in to the old door access. But then we would go to each access group, and if we wanted to give that group access to the door, we would put in the access schedule that we made. So the general access was only during working hours. So any badges assigned to that will only have access during the time set for that schedule in that access group. And then we hit save. And now all the cards that are in that access group that we set up in personnel before will be loaded in. And you would do the same thing in your other access groups when you wanted to give them the access. So in this particular case, this door is going to be in every access group, but they may have different times the cards are allowed in. And then we hit save. Now this lock is fully working with all the cards that are assigned to the access group that the lock is allowed to have. And then we would just continue going on to wireless configuration. That was an example of loading one door in. You could use the same process and do 3 or 4, learn them in, and then go in and do the steps to program them. We'll just discover 1 or 2 more. So we just discovered locks again, and we're going to learn in another one. We're going to call this one the IT room door. And we're going to add that lock in. Okay, now that lock's learned in, it's doing its data download. So we're going to show you an example before. Like we said, we don't want to click more than one lock when we're learning it in, but when you discover, so if you had a bunch of defaulted, you could discover them in one at a time without having to relearn the locks. You just want to make sure your data download is done, your command status is not loading anything. And then we click on add lock, and we could continue to keep doing this. Like if we defaulted a batch of like 4 or 5, we could discover them and then learn them in one at a time. We don't want to click off more than one because of the firmware download and the data download. Definitely could end up causing you issues. So now that lock is learned in, it's sending a data download. We have our signal strengths here. We can see if it learned it on the gateway or expander and the current firmware of the lock. So going back to readers. We can enable our keypad. This one may not have a free access schedule because it's the IT room. We can click save. And then we have a net panel here. Which could be controlling, let's say, maybe an outside gate. This we may want to use a free access schedule on. And again, we can make different free access schedules if we need at different times. And then hit save. And now we're going to go back to our access groups and assign the doors to what access group they're going to be in. So everything is in the all door access automatically. So those cards will start working. So here's an example of in our general access, we wouldn't want those maybe to have access to the IT room, but they would have also access to the gate where now once we hit save, cards will have access to the side door, the gate, any other doors you give them access to, but they wouldn't have access to the IT room. Now that's an example of learning in locks. setting up the features you need, and then putting them into an access group. As soon as they're in an access group and the download starts, all cards that are assigned to them will start working. Next, we're just going to show you a quick example of if you try to learn in more than one lock at a time. Like I said, if you go back here and you checked off more than one lock, how it actually takes longer and it will cause the locks to fail. But once you get to this point, you would just keep doing this over and over until all the locks are moved over, and assigning them the access groups as you go in a batch, in a small batch. Again, after they're defaulted, but the ones that aren't will still be working. Again, this is one of the best practices to try to keep as many doors working as possible. Also, after adding the locks into your access groups, if you are using a facility code, now that the panels are learned in, you also have to add that in the system. Remember, we said before it was a global setting, so that would be under access, under administration, and then facility codes, and then you would click add. And you would pick one panel and put in the facility code. Again, we said we're using the alarm lock card, so that facility code is 19. If you had a few different facility codes, you would just add those in the other slots and put them in personnel accordingly. And if they're going to be applied to all the panels, you could click that and then click save. And then now that will send that to all the panels. If you had to go back and add a facility code to an existing panel, you'd have to do one of those at a time. But also, again, if we were learning these in batches, you could put in, like, say, the first 5, and if we learned in to get those working, and then if we learned in 5 more, you could go back and just repeat the same process with adding the facility codes if they're being used. All right, thank you everybody for watching. We just went over all the necessary steps for successful migration from DO Windows to MVP. These are just some of the best practices we've learned, helping other dealers migrate from DO Windows to other enterprise platforms. Again, depending on the size of the system and the necessity to keep doors working, some of the steps may be implemented in different ways. Last thing I want to go over is some of the popular options in DO Windows and some of the comparative options in MVP. They're not exactly the same, but I will go over what those options do compared to stuff that we had in the DO Windows. So the first one I'd want to show you is Group 2 toggles passage mode. We have an option in configuration readers for double tap read holds door unlock. If this option is checked off, and also in personnel, you would have to check off any cards you want to have this privilege. They'd have to be checked off for enable double read. If this option is checked off, doing a quick double swipe on the reader will keep the door in a unlocked or free access mode, and it will stay unlocked until there is another double read or a manual lock command that is set from either the website or the MVP app. The second option here, which becomes available when you check double read, is double tap override. The way this works is if the door is in free access and you wanted to, let's say, take it out of free access, for example, if somebody was going to lunch and leaving a lobby or a door unattended, they could go up to the reader, double tap it, and it will go out of free access. Also, if the free access schedule is still valid, it's in that time, when they came back, they could double tap it again. It will put the door back into free access, and it will stay in the free access until the end of the schedule. Another thing we have is under event and controls, under doors, we can either lock a door if it's, let's say, in free access and we need to manually lock it remotely. We can do it from the website or the app. Unlock would just be unlocking the door for whatever the strike time is, and unlock hold would be keeping the door held open. Just to put one pointer here, that if you do unlock hold, that door will stay unlocked until a manual lock command is either set from the website or the MVP app. A free access schedule, ending of a free access schedule, will not lock the door. Another option that somebody may use is Group 1 open window. So if this is programmed with a schedule, when any code that's assigned to Group 1 in DO Windows puts in their code, it would put the lock into passage mode. In MVP, we have something that can be set up called First in Area Free Access Lockdown. If this is programmed, a door will not go into free access unless there is a valid, what we call first in control badge presented. So this would be used maybe like on a snow day where the door may go into free access at 9 o'clock, but if nobody with a first in control badge has swiped, it will not go into free access. To learn how to set this up, please refer to the MVP help file. It's very detailed in setting up that option. And then we have the Enable Group 4 by Group 1 open window. This would be any codes or cards assigned to Group 4 wouldn't be valid until a Group 1 code has been entered during the time frame. The equivalent to this in MVP would be called First in Area, where a first in control badge would have to be presented before other badges would allow to have access. Again, refer to the help guide. It's very detailed in setting up either a first in area lockdown or a first in area free access. But if you're going to do those in personnel, any badge that is going to have the ability for first in control would have to be checked off, same as double read. Those are only a few options that MVP offers. There's a lot. It's a very powerful platform that has a lot to offer. Again, check the help file for any questions. You can also always contact us at NAPCO Tech Support for any questions or help, and visit us on the web at tech.napcosecurity.com for more information. Thank you all for watching.